I wasn't looking for much when I moved back to my small hometown. I needed to escape my past, the heartbreak, the loneliness, the failed relationship, and find some semblance of peace. My family was here, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I could finally focus on what I'd been putting off for years, writing my book. I had 1,000 ideas swirling around in my head, but the pressure of the city, the distractions of my ex, they all had a way of blocking the words. So here I was, back in a small town where everyone knew your business, hoping to start fresh. It wasn't long before I started looking for a job. I figured something simple, part-time, so I'd have the freedom to write when I could. And that's when I saw the ad. It was a small box in the corner of the classifieds, tucked between an announcement for a church fundraiser and an ad for local garage sales. Now hiring, night shift at Riverside Bowling Alley, high pay, simple tasks. Call for more information. The phrase high pay caught my attention immediately. Who wouldn't want that? But it was the other words that held me there for longer than I'd like to admit. Simple tasks. I leaned in closer. It listed cleaning shoes, maintaining the lanes, and general upkeep. Nothing out of the ordinary, but something about it felt off. Like it was too simple, too easy. My mind buzzed. I was still reeling from the breakup, the rejection, and the overwhelming feeling that I needed to prove something to myself. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe this was the answer to my financial problems while I worked on my writing. I didn't question it too much. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number. The next day, I found myself walking into the Riverside Bowling Alley for my interview. The building was much older than I remembered. The neon lights outside flickered with a stubborn buzz, casting an eerie glow on the parking lot. Inside, the air smelled of stale popcorn and rubber, the kind of scent that instantly brought back memories of weekends spent with friends, laughing over spilled drinks and bad gutter balls. I was greeted by Mr. Finch, the manager. He was a tall man with thinning hair and a smile that seemed just a little too wide, like he was trying a little too hard to appear friendly. His eyes were sharp, as though he were constantly sizing me up. He stood behind the front counter, his arms crossed, and gave me a brief but polite nod.
Charlotte, right? I'm Mr. Finch, welcome.
Hi, I said, forcing a smile as I shook his hand. His grip was firm, too firm.
We're happy you called. It's not often we get people interested in the night shift, but I think you'll find it's a good fit. Simple tasks: clean the shoes, wipe down the tables, maintain the lanes. Nothing too strenuous.
I nodded, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling that something was off. I hadn't expected much of an interview. After all, the ad had been a little too vague, but it was all happening so fast. The words high pay echoed in my head. It was hard to say no. I can start right away, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mr. Finch smiled again, this time with a glimmer of something unsettling behind his eyes.
Great. The night shift begins at 10 p.m. Just come in, and I'll show you the ropes. The pay's really competitive. The lanes practically clean themselves, you know.
I blinked. The lanes clean themselves?
Yep. The system does most of the work. You just keep things tidy. It's all automated.
He explained, his tone matter-of-fact, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, gauging my reaction. Okay, I said, still trying to make sense of it. Sounds good.
Perfect. We'll see you tonight then. 10 p.m.
He didn't ask if I had any questions. He didn't offer any further details. Just an eager wave as I left the alley. I felt a little uneasy as I walked out the door. It had all happened so quickly. A part of me wanted to back out, but the other part of me, the part that wanted to escape my past and start something new, was already moving forward. The idea of the job, the promise of high pay, and the quiet of the night shift felt like a much-needed change. It was only later, after I left, that I realized how little I really knew about the place, how little Mr. Finch had told me. But it was too late. I had already made up my mind. I needed this. The hum of the fluorescent lights above me was the first thing I noticed when I stepped into Riverside Bowling Alley that night. It was nearly 10 p.m., the air thick with a quiet stillness, as though the entire place was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The scent of stale popcorn and worn leather mingled in the air, and the distant sound of pins clattering echoed down the lanes. It was strange. The alley seemed empty. Empty, but not quite silent. The noise from the pins was the only sound, but there was an undertone, a strange hum, like the building was alive. The manager, Mr. Finch, had given me no real instructions. Just a quick wave and a reminder that everything was automated. Just keep the place tidy, he'd said. The system does the rest. But something about the place didn't sit right with me, not even after the brief conversation with him earlier. Still, I had work to do, and I needed the money. The clock ticked past 10, and I set about my first tasks. Cleaning the shoes felt more routine than I expected, scrubbing off the scuff marks, wiping the dust off the benches. The ball racks needed some straightening, and the seating area in front of the lanes could use a wipe down. As I moved through the space, I noticed how eerie it all felt. The rows of empty lanes stretched out before me, each one silent, the pins waiting motionless in their places. And yet, I could feel something in the air, an energy that didn't belong. It wasn't long before I heard the first noise, a soft scuffing sound from the far end of the alley. I froze, but when I looked, there was no one there. Just the same empty lanes and the stillness that crept along the edges of the building. Maybe it was the wind, I told myself, or the building settling. I continued working, but the whispers began soon after. They were faint, so soft I could barely make them out. I'd stop, trying to listen, but they'd stop too, as if they were never there. Every time I turned my head, expecting to see someone, I was met only with the vast emptiness of the lanes. And then the lights flickered. It was a brief flash, just a momentary dimming of the overhead lights, but it was enough to send a shiver through me. I paused, looking up, waiting for them to settle, but the flickering continued at intervals. It wasn't just the lights, the whole place felt off, as if something was lurking in the shadows, watching. I shook off the unease and went to the next lane, wiping it down. The oil from the bowling balls left a strange residue on the wood, and it was always a hassle to clean up. But as I started to wipe the lane in front of me, I froze again. The oil, the dirt, it was disappearing. Not with the towel I was using, but as if something invisible was wiping the lane clean. I stood there, staring at the smooth surface, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The lane was cleaning itself. There was no mechanism for this, no machine or brush that I could see. It was just the lane, glowing faintly under the harsh fluorescent lights, as if it were being polished by an unseen hand. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was some automated system Mr. Finch had mentioned, though I didn't recall him saying anything about this. Maybe it was just part of the job, I thought. Maybe it was normal. But then I heard the laugh. It wasn't loud at first, just a distant chuckle, deep and guttural. It came from the far end of the bowling alley where the lane stretched into darkness. My breath caught in my throat, and I turned, expecting to see someone. But there was no one, not a soul in sight. The laughter, if you could call it that, echoed again, much closer this time. It was like the sound came from inside the walls, reverberating off the lanes in a way that didn't make sense. A coldness washed over me, so sudden it took my breath away. My skin prickled, and the air grew thick, like I was surrounded by something I couldn't see, something waiting. My heart raced, the laughter fading but the cold staying, clinging to my skin. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just the wind or some prankster messing with the speakers, but deep down I knew that wasn't it. This felt different. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, my pulse hammering in my ears. The temperature dropped, so suddenly that I could see my breath fog in front of me. I shivered, my fingers stiff as I reached for my cleaning supplies. My mind raced, wondering if maybe I should leave, but I forced myself to push through. I was here to work, to prove to myself that I could handle this. But the whispers, they hadn't stopped. They were getting louder now, the soft voices curling around me like a cold breeze. I could barely make out the words, faint, unintelligible, but they were there, echoing in the corners of my mind. The faint scraping of something against the floor broke my thoughts. I turned, my eyes scanning the darkness, but there was nothing there. The lanes were empty. The machines were still. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I wanted to leave. I should have left. But the thought of walking out into the night, of leaving the safety of the alley, felt even more terrifying. Something inside me told me I wasn't safe out there either. I glanced once more at the automated lane cleaning system, watching as it hummed to life again. The oil on the lane was disappearing before my eyes. The cold, the whispers, the laughter, it all seemed to pulse through the air, drawing me back to the lanes, to that strange force that made them clean themselves. I wasn't alone. The presence was here, and it was waiting. The night dragged on, the eerie silence punctuated only by the occasional clattering of pins and the soft hum of the lane cleaning system. It felt as though time itself was moving in slow motion, each minute stretching longer than the last. By the time my break came, I was relieved. The constant tension had begun to eat away at me, and the chill in the air made it hard to think straight. I stepped into the small break room at the back of the alley, hoping to distract myself with something. Anything. The room was dimly lit, with old vending machines lining one wall and a few battered chairs scattered about. I grabbed a soda and sank into one of the chairs, my thoughts racing. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination running wild, that it was normal to feel uneasy in a dark, empty place at night. But the whispers, the coldness, the cleaning lanes, they weren't normal. None of it was. My eyes wandered around the break room, and that's when I noticed something odd. A dusty old bulletin board on the far wall, covered in faded clippings and notices. Something about it caught my attention, and I found myself getting up to look at it. The yellowed pieces of paper were covered in old news articles, some of them so old the text was barely legible. One article stood out, though. Its headline, written in bold, dark letters: "Tragedy strikes Riverside Bowling Alley. Several dead in machine malfunction." My stomach twisted as I read the article. It was dated from years ago, long before I'd been born. The report was vague at first, talking about an accident in which a malfunctioning lane cleaning machine had caused a horrific tragedy. According to the article, several people had been caught in the machinery when it suddenly went haywire, dragging them down the lanes and crushing their bodies in a violent, unthinkable way. The description was gruesome. Mangled limbs, crushed skulls, and blood splattered across the alley floor. I could feel my hands shaking as I read on. The article mentioned that the bowling alley had been closed temporarily for investigation, but no one had ever been charged. The cause of the malfunction had been deemed a freak accident, and after a few months, the bowling alley had reopened, as though nothing had happened. The town had quickly swept the incident under the rug, moving on, as if it were just another unfortunate event. But what made my blood run cold was the part about the rumors. People said the bowling alley was haunted, that the souls of the victims had never truly left. At first, the town dismissed the rumors as just that, stories told by the superstitious and the bored. But some of the older locals swore they could hear strange sounds late at night. Whispers, footsteps, and the eerie feeling that someone was watching them from the dark. I leaned back in my chair, the article clutched in my trembling hands. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Was this why the air felt so heavy? Was this what I was sensing? The ghosts of those poor souls? The thought seemed ridiculous. I shook my head, trying to shake off the growing fear. It was just an old story, I told myself. A tragedy that had happened years ago. There was no way the rumors could be true. But the whispers, they were real. The laughter, the cold, the feeling of being watched. I had to finish my shift. I had to get through it. But now I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I wasn't alone here after all. I returned to the main alley floor after my break, the air colder than before. The hum of the lane cleaning machine greeted me again, but it didn't comfort me like it had earlier. In fact, it made me uneasy. It was as though the machinery wasn't just cleaning the lanes, it was waiting, watching. I walked down the rows of empty lanes, trying to focus on the mundane tasks that still needed to be done, wiping down the tables, organizing the ball racks. But as I moved, the unsettling sense of being followed returned. I could hear the soft scrape of footsteps behind me, and my heart skipped a beat. I stopped, glancing around, but there was no one. The space was still empty. I told myself it was just the sound of my own footsteps, or the building settling, but the feeling didn't go away. It lingered, like someone was standing just behind me, breathing down my neck. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, and I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. I turned around to head back down the lane, and that's when I saw it. A pen, sitting innocently on the counter, began to roll slowly toward the edge. I froze, my eyes locked on it as it tipped over and fell to the floor with a soft clink. I looked around quickly, but there was no one there. My pulse quickened. It had rolled by itself. I bent down to pick it up, but just as I did, I heard the scrape of a chair moving across the floor. I spun around. The chair, one of the folding chairs near the seating area, had moved, its legs dragging along the wooden floor as though someone had pushed it. But the place was still empty. My breath hitched. I could feel the air growing thicker around me, the cold pressing in on all sides. And then, just as suddenly, the pressure on my chest returned, the sensation that someone was standing too close, breathing heavily against my skin. I spun around, my heart racing in my chest. There, across the alley, I saw it. A shadowy figure, standing in the mirror at the far end of the lane. Its form was vague, almost indistinct, but there was no mistaking the presence of something. Someone. The shadow seemed to watch me, unmoving. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my legs turning to stone. I couldn't look away. But then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished. I blinked, staring at the mirror, my mind reeling, but there was nothing. The reflection was empty. No shadow, no figure, nothing. I stumbled backward, my hands shaking as I grabbed onto the nearest counter for support. Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? Was I imagining things? But deep down, I knew. I wasn't alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the shadows were growing darker and the whispers louder. I tried to focus on my work, pushing the thoughts of the article and the ghostly figure I'd seen to the back of my mind. But each passing moment made it harder. The atmosphere was thick with an almost palpable sense of dread, and I could feel it creeping up my spine. I was wiping down the shoes again when I heard a faint scrape, a sound so soft at first that I thought it might have been my imagination. But then it came again. A scrape, a drag. It was coming from the far end of the lane, from where the ball return mechanism hummed softly. I forced myself to turn away from the shoes and head toward the sound, though my heart was pounding harder with each step I took. The air felt unnaturally cold now, and the silence seemed oppressive, like the entire world had fallen away, and all that remained was the noise of my own breathing. I reached the ball return area and stopped dead in my tracks. It was dark here, darker than it had any right to be. The shadows seemed to gather and press into the corners, thickening as if the walls themselves were pulling closer. I could barely make out the outline of the machines in the dim light, the ball return mechanism sitting still and cold. I stepped forward, my footfalls muffled on the smooth wooden floor, and the temperature dropped even further. I shivered, a chill running down my spine. Then I saw it, the flicker. At first, it was just a small distortion like static on an old TV screen, but as I blinked, it grew clearer. A shadow, a figure. I froze. The shadow began to take shape, tall and looming. It was a man, or at least, it looked like a man. But there was something wrong with it. His form was flickering, like smoke rising from a dying fire, shifting and wavering in the air. His face was just a blur of darkness, but his eyes were hollow, deep pits where light never reached. The longer I stared, the more I felt myself being drawn into them, as though they were pulling me into a void. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to move, as if frozen in place by an invisible force. The scraping sound grew louder, closer, and the thing, moved toward me. I could feel its presence, a cold pressure on my chest, as though the very air was thickening around me.
You shouldn't have come. You won't leave.
The words slithered through the air, wrapping themselves around my mind, sinking deep into my thoughts. I wanted to look away, to escape, but I couldn't. The voice was inside me now, pulling at something dark and primal, something I couldn't name. I was paralyzed, my entire body screaming for movement, but my legs wouldn't obey. The lights overhead flickered suddenly, a sharp buzz cutting through the silence. The fluorescent bulbs above seemed to blink in and out of existence, casting the entire space in erratic flashes of harsh light and deep shadows. For a moment, the alley was bathed in total darkness, and when the lights returned, the figure was closer, too close. I could feel its breath, or what I thought was breath, against my skin, icy cold and foul, and I had to fight not to gag. The air tasted of rot, of something old and decayed.
You shouldn't have come. You won't leave.
A shiver ran through me, and in that moment, the shadows around the alley deepened, stretching and warping into something unnatural. I glanced down at the bowling lane, my eyes drawn unwillingly to the smooth surface. It was then that I saw them. Red. Blood-red handprints had appeared on the lane, slowly spreading across the edge. They were unmistakable. Real. Their crimson hue was vivid against the polished wood, and they seemed to pulse, as though they were alive, as though they were reaching for me. I took an involuntary step back, my breath catching in my throat. The handprints were growing larger, the edges spreading, the blood darker and thicker. And then, something strange happened. A message began to form in the blood. "Get out." The words were jagged, distorted, like they were clawed into the surface. I tried to wipe them away with the rag in my hand, but as soon as the cloth touched the blood, it only smeared, spreading the marks further and further, the message becoming more and more pronounced. It was as if the words were fighting against me, refusing to be erased, refusing to be ignored. I stumbled back from the lane, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The figure, the man, the entity was still there, standing silent and unmoving, watching me with those empty, hollow eyes. It was no longer just standing in the corner. It was in the air around me, pressing down, pushing against my chest. It was everywhere. I felt it now, a weight in my chest that wasn't just physical, it was oppressive, crushing me from all sides, as though the very building itself was closing in.
Leave. You're not welcome here.
I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how far I could go before it caught me. All I knew was that I had to escape before the thing in the shadows got any closer. But the door, the exit, they felt farther away than ever. And that voice, it kept calling, a whisper in the dark.
You won't leave.
I ran, my legs moving faster than I thought possible. But it didn't matter. The air around me was thick and suffocating, as though it were pressing against me, slowing me down. The whispers grew louder, closer, and no matter how fast I moved, I couldn't shake them. I couldn't escape the dark presence that had latched onto me, that had followed me from the moment I stepped into this place. I reached the far end of the alley, my eyes darting to the exit, but it felt miles away. The door seemed to stretch, getting farther and farther with every frantic step. The very walls of the bowling alley felt like they were closing in on me. I was suffocating, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. And then it happened. The scraping sound of the bowling ball return mechanism flared again, but this time it wasn't distant. It was right there, behind me, too close. I didn't dare look back. I kept running, but the ground felt like it was shifting beneath me. Every step was heavier, each one dragging me further into the cold. Without warning, the lights flickered again, and a horrible screeching noise erupted from the lane cleaning machine. The machine that had been quietly humming before now roared to life. Its gears spinning violently, the lights flickering in sync with its erratic movements. The sound was deafening, like the growl of an animal ready to pounce. I stumbled, my legs giving way beneath me as the air grew thick with static. My vision blurred, the shadows creeping along the floor as if they were alive, reaching toward me, pulling me in. Then, it happened. The force. Something grabbed me. No, something yanked me. It was like invisible hands wrapped around my waist, dragging me backward across the lane. I couldn't fight it. My body moved against my will, slammed hard against the slick wood of the lane. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even process what was happening. The cold fingers of the entity dug into me, and my chest felt like it was being crushed under a weight that wasn't there. I twisted and clawed at the floor, but the force was too strong, pulling me further into the lane, dragging me across the smooth surface, like I was nothing more than a rag doll. Then, I saw it. The automated pin collection system at the far end of the lane, a machine I'd once thought of as just another part of the alley's routine, roared to life. Its gears ground against one another, the machinery clanking and screeching as though it were alive. And suddenly, it wasn't just a machine anymore. It had intent. It was moving with purpose, with a malicious hunger. I screamed, finally finding my voice as I struggled against the unseen force. But the roar of the machine drowned it out. My legs kicked, my body writhed, but it was futile. I was being pulled toward it, toward the mechanical maw that had come to life with a terrifying purpose. I could feel the cold metal of the machine reaching for me, grabbing for my limbs, pulling me toward its gears. I slammed into it. My body smashed against the sharp metal edges of the pin collection system. Pain shot through me, and I gasped, my breath ragged and shallow. The machine was moving with an eerie rhythm, its gears turning faster now, its claws of metal reaching, stretching, pulling me closer with each movement. And then, in one final, sickening motion, the machine clamped down. I was being crushed. The pain was unbearable. My body contorted in ways it shouldn't have been. I could feel the metal gnawing into my limbs, the weight of the machine compressing my chest, pushing the air out of my lungs. My vision began to darken as the pressure became too much, and all I could hear was the roaring hum of the machine, louder and louder as it consumed me. I tried to scream, but my throat was already crushed, my body no longer capable of movement. I could only feel the cold of the machine, the sharp teeth of its gears tearing through me, and then, nothing. The bowling alley was eerily silent once more. The lights flickered and buzzed, but there was no sound. The lane stood still, as if nothing had ever happened. And there, in the corner of the lane, was my broken body, a heap of mangled limbs, crushed beyond recognition. The machine, once thought of as merely a tool for the alley, continued to operate as though nothing was wrong. The pin collection system hummed and whirred, its gears moving with a smooth mechanical rhythm, unaware of the horror it had just created. There was no scream. There was no help. There was only the silence of the bowling alley and the faint, lingering feeling that someone was still watching. I can't say I remember what happened after the darkness swallowed me whole. The pain was all-consuming, and then there was just nothing. No sounds, no light, just an overwhelming emptiness, as though I was floating in a void. But the world didn't stop, did it? The next morning, the town woke up like it always did. People went about their business, sipping coffee, chatting about the usual things, the weather, the price of groceries, the upcoming town fair. But there was something else in the air, something heavy, something that wasn't there before. The incident, my death. I never thought I would be the subject of a local news story. But there I was, staring back at myself on the screen, my face pale and frozen in terror.
A tragic accident last night at the local bowling alley has left one woman dead. Authorities are investigating a malfunction in the lane cleaning system, which is believed to have caused the fatal injuries. The victim, identified as Charlotte Brown.
The news anchor droned on, but I couldn't hear the rest. It didn't matter. They didn't know the truth. They didn't understand what happened. The report described how my body was discovered, mangled, and unrecognizable, caught in the pin collection system that was supposed to be nothing more than a tool for cleaning the lanes. They said it malfunctioned. They couldn't explain how or why, just that something went wrong. They ruled it an accident, a tragic one, but an accident nonetheless. I was just another casualty in a world that didn't care. The rest of the town was in shock, of course. They were sad, of course they were. But there were whispers. I could feel them. The kind of whispers you hear when people think they know more than they're saying. I saw old-timers talking in hushed tones at the coffee shop, glancing nervously at the bowling alley across the street. Always felt something off about that place. One of them muttered, not even trying to hide it. Too quiet, too cold, even on the hottest days. The place has got a dark aura, another person added, their voice low as though just saying it out loud might make it real. I heard stories about people disappearing, but no one ever listened. I couldn't help but shudder at those words. They had always known, hadn't they? The strange things that happened there, the whispers, the cold air, the shadows that didn't belong. It wasn't just an accident, it was something else, something dark that had always been there. But the town would never admit it, would they? They'd call it an accident, a mechanical failure, something explainable, something easy, just like they always did. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't be the last. The town moved on. They had to. But as I listened to the newscaster finish the report, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. The camera panned to the bowling alley, the lanes eerily quiet, the parking lot now devoid of cars. The alley's lights flickered briefly, casting shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should. The pin collection system whirred and clicked, a small gleam reflecting off its metal surface. Then it happened. A shadow seemed to move. It was subtle at first, like the trick of light playing across the lane, but as the camera lingered, it became unmistakable. There, just beyond the machine, the figure of a man stood, tall, motionless, flickering in and out of focus. His eyes, hollow, dark pits, stared directly at the camera. The footage cut to black, the broadcast quickly moving on, but I knew. I could feel it. The entity wasn't gone. It was still there, waiting. It wasn't finished. The camera cut back to the bowling lanes, the lights dimming once more as the machine clicked into gear, as if nothing had changed. But it had. It always had. The machinery continued its work, cleaning the lanes, pushing the balls back into place. But this time, it wasn't just the pins that it was collecting. It was something else. Something that still waited. And who would be next? I wanted to scream, but I had no voice. I was just a memory now. Another name on the list of casualties the bowling alley had claimed. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not like this. I could still feel the weight of it. The presence. The thing that had killed me. The thing that had fed on me. Was still there, watching, waiting. The lane cleaning machine hummed one last time. And I knew it wouldn't stop.